We've heard a lot of complaints, from fans, media, whatever.
We're building a team that we believe is going to sustain its competitiveness.
The goal is to get it to that championship level. Every move we made over the past couple of years is with that in mind.
But this is a process.
And it doesn't happen overnight.
We're not here focused on the record. We're focused on improvement.
At the end of the day,
You can't just snap your fingers and say, oh, we're going to be a better culture now. It takes months, years.
And that doesn't happen overnight.
What we are is young, exciting, hardworking, and going to improve.
Absolutely.
I am absolutely convinced that we are in a better place now than we have been.
It's transparent. It's just out there. It's glaring.
My response to that, I think, is
We did new things that had never been done before. We have breakfast and lunch now.
People don't realize that.
With a combination of draft picks and free agency,
We expect to be competing right up to the very end.
And it doesn't happen overnight.
Okay, so Rick and I are back. It is Sunday, about 1:30 Central Time, on the 13th of December. So preseason started. That's what we were just kind of chatting about. And that started 2 days ago. So we're 2 days into the preseason. So we've got a couple more podcasts to get out before the regular season starts on the 22nd of December. And this week is the second half of our 25 under list, the Tough Watch 25. So, yeah, almost had that wrong. Tough Watch 25. So this is the second half. We ended last week's pod at 14, and that was Marvin Bagley that we had at 14.
And we are certain of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I feel great about it. Didn't get to see him play, unfortunately, in the Sacramento
No, he hasn't
game.
played yet.
No, but I feel good about it. No, so that was, we ended last week's pod on a grouping of bigs, and it was Triple J, Markkanen, Clark, and Bagley in that order. And the top 13 before we get into it, and we will get in quick because we kind of need to go through it at pace. But any overriding thoughts before we get into the 13? Something about the group in general in comparison to who we covered last week.
The thing that I'm most interested in, because this will happen this year, is who will break into the elite group. And you guys will see as we go through this list, pretty quickly it's going to go from guys that are uncertain or guys that project to be number 2, number 3 guys to being guys that are franchise players. And so the most fun part about this every year is there will for surely be somebody that is either not on the list at all or somebody that is 13 or lower that will next season be in this group. Last year we had Bam, and obviously we haven't said his name yet because he's higher on the list. Like, we had Bam in the 20s, somewhere in the 20s, but he was like lumped in with Wendell Carter and like Domantas Sabonis, which I think was fair at the time. And he obviously now is like kind of a franchise guy. Pascal Siakam jumped into there, and so somebody's gonna jump in from this group, and it will feel obvious in hindsight, but right now that's unclear. And so I think we're coming into here, this like 13 to 10 range is actually 9 through 13 are all guys that still have a lot to prove, or they don't play like an super valuable position. And so these are the guys that are like, for one reason or another, we're still not quite sure what their value is or what they're going to be. And then 8 and above are all max guys to some degree. So, it's an interesting list because it's like, it's really deep, but it's also because these guys are coming into the league so young and so not raw, they're quite polished actually, but the league is so talent heavy and these guys come in so young that even 3-4 years into their career, there's still pathways for guys to become stars, and there's still pathways for those same guys to be out of the league in a year or two. So it's a lot of guesswork here.
Yeah, and some of the guys on the list, and we'll just go right into it. I agree with you. This list is 14 through 25. It was more taking shots on guys, and it's not to say that those guys aren't going to be good players. 13 to 1, and we'll talk about each player individually, obviously. These are the guys that potentially could be foundational pieces for their, respective franchises. So at 13, we have OG Anunoby, and this is he's kind of on an island on his own a little bit at 13. He's one of the few guys yet that hasn't gotten paid. He's going into the 4th season and has not signed an extension with Toronto. And that number could be, it could be a max depending on how he plays this year.
Could be.
Or it could be significantly under the max depending on how he performs. He's a productive player regardless of how this season plays out, and he's valuable to what they do. But what he ends up getting paid will be dependent on how he performs this season. And
it's interesting. Before we get off the money part with him, because it's so relevant with Toronto, because they're saving all of their space, obviously, to make a run at Giannis next year or another big free agent. With OG, I feel like in a normal situation, like if they weren't a cap space team next year, it would really behoove them to attempt to get an extension done, because I think if you get him into restricted free agency, and especially you get him another healthy season playing, that price is going up. And the guy I would compare him to is Jaylen Brown. And I think the Celtics are so fortunate, and probably this could honestly make their ability to like become a title contender in the next handful of years, is getting him at a number below the max. And for OG right now, if you could get him in on the Jaylen Brown deal, I mean, just look at the deals that these guys got a lot of guys have gotten when they've gotten into free agency. I mean, like Otto Porter got maxed out after his rookie deal, and his first 4 years were not nearly as accomplished as OG's. Obviously, we just saw Jeremy Grant get 20 a year. Like OG is a universal fit. You know, we talked about a couple of these guys on the list last week that only a handful of them were guys where you'd be like, you could put them on any team. Literally, OG would start for every single team in the league, regardless of their style. And he's going to command a payday.
Yeah, no, and my point on OG, as we go into just some of the notes I had on him, you and I both love OG and have basically since he came into the league and started getting minutes. And he's one of those guys, similar to one of his teammates, Pascal Siakam, who every year has grown his game and developed his game. And he's still so young that you have to imagine every subsequent season he's going to continue to grow and develop and improve. And because of that, if you're saying today he's a fringe max player, I'm betting he's going to be a max player by the end of the year. You're right. If you could get it done early and get a little bit of a discount off of the max, it'd be a good move for Toronto. But a little bit on OG, he's kind of a prototypical 3-and-D guy as currently constituted, his current game. He improved his three-point shot significantly last season. He's a multi-positional defender. He's a big-bodied wing. And you said it, he's a universal fit because of that. What I wanted to know from you is my bet on OG going into this season. And it was a weird off season in the way that a lot of teams did a lot of stuff. And so if your team didn't do a lot of stuff, it's kind of you went onto the back burner a little bit. And when guys who cover the league are trying to project, who might move into a potential playoff spot and who could fall, when they talk about the East, Indiana gets talked a lot, but I've heard Toronto mentioned as well. And I don't think that that's true, number one. I mean, I don't see them falling at all. But I actually think that OG is ready to probably take a little bit of a heavier offensive burden on.
He's going to have to. There's no doubt about it. Like, he's just going to have to. They are at least what we think. This is the thing about Toronto, is every year, it's like Miami, where you look at their roster, we can't say for sure right now that they're thin because we don't know how these guys that they've had in their ecosystem are going to develop. Because it's like, they seem thin right now, but that's because we don't know if Matt Thomas is a player. And that's because we don't know if Chris Boucher is a player. You know what I mean? But like, if their track record is any indication, then there's probably some guys that they have sitting around that are going to be real players. And I agree with you. I think Toronto's a very, very safe bet to go over, if for no other reason than this is a stat that's bandied about a lot, but I think it's really relevant. They've gone over like 7 years in a row, and ever since Masai has been there. And it doesn't matter who's on the team. They've built that ecosystem where they really are like the new Spurs. And with OG, like, to bring it back to him, you're right. He will have a bigger offensive role this year, and it'll be to be seen what that is. It's based on what he's done to this point. It doesn't seem like he's going to be a guy that is going to be getting ISO buckets or taking dudes in the post. But again, he's so young, we don't necessarily know if that's his game. I will say, even if he doesn't improve his offensive game at all, I still think he's justified at being 13 on the list because as of this moment, he's a 40% three-point shooter. You're right, he's a huge body that can defend every position on the floor. And basically his floor, what he is currently right now, is, I don't know, like the best perimeter defender and a guy that can, or the best wing defender, let me say that, because that encompasses he can guard bigs and smalls. Like, he's the best wing defender, and on offense, he is the apex version of what everybody wanted, Harrison Barnes or Andrew Wiggins to be. You know what I mean? He's just like that perfect guy to be your fourth or fifth guy on offense. And if he becomes better than that offensively, he's a franchise guy.
Yeah, I think what'll likely happen is they're probably going to ask him to shoot the 3-point shot at volume this year. He only took 3 a game last year, which was very similar to the previous year.
8 total shots a game last year.
So I assume they're going to increase his 3-point shooting volume, which would make total sense based on what his percentage is. And then I think it's going to be, with what else they have on the team, he spaces the floor offensively. He can probably improve his handle a little bit, and maybe they don't really need a lot of secondary ball handling, but what they do need is somebody who can just like effectively attack a closeout and is creative in finishing. So I think he has the potential to do that for sure. I don't see why anybody would bet against that happening. And he's 13 on the list because as we go up this list, you're going to start noticing that we're going to be talking about some like all-star and towards the top of the list, like superstar potential guys. So I don't know if OG has that. I would say it's less likely for OG than some of the guys in front of him. But it's definitely there. Like you said, I mean, if he becomes a really polished offensive player, given what he does defensively, he's like a fringe, like franchise guy. Let's go to 12. The one spot ahead of him is SGA, which I know.
Now that we've just talked about OG,
it's betting on upside. We talked about it before. It's what we talked about before we made the list. Like we're betting upside. Now here's what I'll say about SGA, and I'll kind of kick it to you, is SGA is going to have a really tough year. They have liquidated their entire roster basically, and they're going to be building for the future. So SGA is really their only blue chipper that's left on this team. And SGA had a really good year last year, playing in a 3-guard lineup with Russ. Or I'm sorry, with CP and Schroeder. So like the 3-guard lineup was why he was not the only reason, but a big reason why he was so effective and had his best year as a pro so far. Well, that's no longer going to be the case, and he's going to be asked to carry a lot of weight for this franchise in the short term while they kind of tear it down and start building back up. I don't know if he has what it takes to carry that much weight for a franchise. And what's difficult with him is if he doesn't, right now, you would say, well, SGA, I mean, he could be like a top 2 player on a contending team someday if he continues to improve. If he really struggles this year and can't carry the weight that the franchise is going to ask of him, that's going to significantly impact what I think he's actually capable of. And it doesn't mean he's not a good player. It just means they're going to have to really build around him for him to be effective. Right now, they're hoping he's a franchise cornerstone player. TBD whether or not that's true. Do you believe that to be true?
I mean, I would certainly feel really good about having him on my team after 2 years. You know what I mean? Like I would imagine that after this 3rd year, we're gonna have to get ready to pay him. He is gonna the position he's in is really tough. Like really, really tough. That team, especially after seeing them yesterday, like it's one thing to, do that tear down and you see the team on paper and, you get the benefit of the doubt being a really good organization and just being like, well, they're the Thunder. So it's like, they're not going to look that bad out there. That it's the least talented team in the league by a lot, and one of the least talented teams we've seen in the league probably in the last 5 years. And it's just all guys that are temporarily there, like guys on, obviously they were a big dumping ground for bad money so that they could get draft picks. So it's a combination of those kind of guys. You have very fringe NBA guys, which is what you do when you're in that rebuild cycle. They're looking for diamonds in the rough. You have, Poku was out there playing. Teo Maladon was actually really good last night. They're just playing a bunch of very fringy guys around Shea, and we'll see. I mean, it has a potential to instill some pretty bad habits in him because he's so much better than everybody else on the team scoring the ball, but really in all facets that, I mean, he's going to take 20 plus shots a game. And It's just and maybe that's good for him because maybe that will develop his scoring chops when that's not really going to be the biggest part of his game when he's fully actualized. I don't know. It's just it's a rough situation.
It's dangerous. I like how you framed that. It could be good. Who knows? Getting that many shots up may be kind of the offensive development he needs. Or it goes the other way, which is what you mentioned, which he learns some really bad habits, and depending on how long it takes to build this thing out, it's just a terrible spot to be put in. And it's really unfortunate because early in his career, he had the benefit of playing for a button-up organization with players
right.
on the team that could help him.
Those 2 years were just the dream situation, and now he's no, this is the situation. Now you're Trae Young. You know what
Correct.
I mean? And it's and we'll see if he gets the Trae Young criticism where it's what else am I supposed to do? You know what I mean? It's Trae Young's just gets dunked on his first 2 years for putting up stats. It's there's nobody else here. This is the best option is doing this. And it'll be the same thing in OKC. Shea shooting the ball a million times a game. That's the best option.
Which is interesting because SGA has the benefit of being everybody's darling because he's been on good teams. So not only does he look like a good player, but the team is winning and there's not a ton expected of him. So it's easy to give him the benefit of the doubt. We'll see if that holds given how you laid it out.
How concerned are you about how much he shrunk in the bubble?
Oh, it made me really nervous. I called before the playoffs started. I called for him to have kind of his breakout. I thought he was going to be really good for them in the playoffs, and I was dead wrong on it. He looked timid, and he looked like he didn't know what to do on the court, and so he was kind of aimlessly floating around. It was very concerning because I would have been a lot more confident in him going forward if his performance would have been maybe he shot the ball really poorly, but he looked like Shea, where he was really assertive and he was really aggressive and he looked like he was supposed to be there. He just didn't look like he was ready for that. And now he's
what do you
not
think?
Not going to be there.
Let me ask you, what do you think? Obviously, we've said a bunch of negative stuff here. You're the bigger fan of him than I am. What is, and I'm not saying that's obviously, this is our list combined. I mean, I had him a little lower. It's not like I had him off the list or anything. Nothing ridiculous. What is a fully actualized version of this guy? And, what is that role? What's his optimum role?
Well, I mean, if it plays out, the reason I'm such a big fan of his is I do think he has a good court vision, and I do think he is a good passer. I don't think he's an elite passer, but I mean, I think he's a good passer. And at his size, he's just going to be able to do things at the point guard position that other guys can't because of his size. And so I think if he was your point guard and he developed his offensive game where he was a 3-point threat, not an elite shooter, but he was shooting mid-30s to high 30s, so you had to honor the shot, coupled with his ability to break guys down off the dribble, I think he would be a fantastic player because with his size, he plays both sides more effectively than a lot of point guards do. So if it worked, I think this is, one of my questions for him when I did my notes was, do I think he can be a foundational piece? Do I think he might be the best or second best player on a team that contends someday? If he does that, no doubt about it. Absolutely no doubt about it. What I worry about is how much is this experience going to stunt his growth? And we could be dead wrong. I mean, maybe he really shines in this role, and not to where it leads to wins, but it doesn't affect his development. But with some guys, it does. Like, you play on bad teams, it's kind of, I mean, it really does stunt your development. So I hope that's not the case with Shea, because all we've seen of Shea is him playing with veterans and good and competent teams. This will be the first experience with Shea on a really bad team.
Yeah, and all we've seen him do, at least from a production standpoint, is improve. And so, and that would, I think it should be everybody's expectation this year, is he took a big scoring jump and a usage jump from year 1 to 2, and I think it's fair to expect both those things to go up again. And then, and if you're starting at a baseline where you're already getting 20 a game, maybe he's at a 23, 24, 25 a game, and that you start to kind of creep into all-star consideration. He's obviously not going to be an all-star because of how loaded the West is, and he's going to be on an awful team. But if he can at least start to play himself into that range where you're starting to talk, because like year 3 now, you should be starting to, with the production he's already had, you should start to talk about him in that class of like Mitchell and Devin Booker, and
Sure.
Jamal Murray. You know what I mean? In the West, like, you should start to get to that class. So we'll see. We'll see if he gets there this year.
Yep. So we'll move on to 11, which is DeAndre Ayton. So
what a shock.
He made a massive leap from last year's list to this one. Congratulations to DeAndre Ayton.
Seriously, congratulations to DeAndre. And I, you know what? Congratulations to us for having the maturity to, be wrong about
wrong.
stuff. And it's okay, man. But yeah, I mean, DeAndre Ayton, what a great story for us last year, because he was somebody that from Jump Street, and Jump Street being the 2018 draft, low on him because of the position he played. And he's just, it's not at every turn, because it's, I wasn't a big fan of him his rookie year. Then he got suspended at the beginning of the season last year. But he just took such a big leap last year defensively that he has forced himself onto this list, and arguably could have been a little higher. He's played himself into being a worthy, no one's ever going to be worthy of getting drafted or chosen ahead of Luka. Like, it is what it is. Like, everybody had the opportunity to draft LeBron and they didn't, and but he's a worthy top pick now, and a worthy franchise cornerstone.
Yeah, and they've built, with the Chris Paul trade and everything they've done in the draft, guys that, we criticized at the time, but like Bridges turned out, Cam Johnson's better than we expected. They added Chris Paul, Devin Booker's great. They've done a good job of building out the team. So DeAndre Ayton is now, this season, and this is going to be a common thread with a few guys, he's now playing on what should be a really good team. And so he is going to be able to showcase what he's able to do playing with other talented players and playing a more defined role that probably fits better what he does. What I'll say with DeAndre Ayton, you already led it. The reason he's this high on the list, I did a little comparison between him and John Collins from a statistical standpoint. And offensively speaking, John Collins is better in every category. He has better dad stats and better efficiency. The reason DeAndre Ayton is this much higher on the list is what you said. Defensively, he made a big leap. And he's a true center. And so,
yeah, he's a tank.
Yeah, so a defensive center is really valuable, like a guy who can give you proper rim protection and a big body that can help kind of quell some of the guards in the West and make it difficult for them to score. Like, it's insanely valuable. And the one thing that I'm kind of looking for DeAndre this year is his offense is going to be improved just because the guys they have added to the roster. I mean, it's going to be so much easier.
Their
for him.
offense is going to be it's going to be so easy. You said it. Like, I don't even know if you can send a double. Like, if you have Bridges and Johnson out there with, I don't know if I can't off the top of my head remember a better, just for a big man, a better backcourt to play with than CP and Book.
Yeah.
Like, I honestly can't off the top of my head recall a better backcourt as a big man. Like, the amount of looks this dude's going to get and the amount of space he's going to have to operate.
Yeah, it's just going to be easy. That's the thing, is life is going to be so much easier for him on the offensive end. And to define more clearly a little bit about the leap he made defensively, and this is just my eyes, what I saw because we watched a lot of Phoenix. He developed a level of anticipation when it came to protecting the rim that just didn't exist before, and I didn't know he was going to develop, which is he was very effectively able to help. And before, my criticism of him is it's like, well, yeah, hypothetically, if you drove right at him and you're a guard,
of
like,
course.
yeah, he could defend the rim. But it's like he didn't have great feel.
Right.
Last year, I felt like his help and stuff like that was tremendous. And because of that, I mean, you kind of, before we did the podcast, this was a couple weeks ago, we were talking when we were making this list, and it's like DeAndre Ayton, it is possible. There is now a world where DeAndre Ayton develops into like the best, most dominant center in the league at some point.
For sure.
Which is crazy.
It's crazy. And that leap that you're talking about, that awareness, we saw it, he was kind of defending like Karl Towns in his rookie year, and then at the beginning of last year, where an example of this would be like, you'd leap out at a guy to try to get a block, and the guy's already taking a difficult shot. It's like, you don't have to do that. And because you did that, now there's nobody under the hoop and the team gets a putback dunk. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that, where it's like, it's just awareness stuff. Or in the pick and roll, you leaned the wrong way and the guy blows right by you. Or, it's just not making the right read quick enough and reacting quick enough. And so, yeah, he can do those things now at a high level. Offensively, he's more finesse than you would think because he's such a humongous dude. And so that to me is probably the next step in his evolution. And it should be helped by the fact that if everything we just said of how easy stuff is going to be offensively, is he needs to start mashing dudes on the block. And if he can do it, he can do that. It's not even if, like, he's big enough for sure, and he's nimble enough and skilled enough. It's just something he needs to do. He needs to get a mean streak and a dominant streak. And if he can do that, this should be a really good team, like straight up. Between him, he's like the third option there as far as just getting a bucket when shit breaks down from their normal offense. But like, you have two really, really fantastic ISO guys in the perimeter that can get a shot if necessary. And now you have another guy you could give him the ball in the post to try to get a shot if necessary. And it's like, they got the ingredients for sure.
Yeah, one more thing before we move on from Ayton. The other thing I'm interested to keep an eye on is they could be an elite offense if he can develop as a passer as well, which is the other thing that I'm looking for. Is he's going to be, again, every situation that a player's in really matters. And getting to play on a team with Chris Paul, if you want to develop as a passer, is really, really helpful. And if he can be like an above average passing center, this dude is, that offense is going to be unbeatable because you're going to be able to do everything. You can run it through him in the post. You can run it through him on the elbow. And then again, he's such a physical big body that if he can continue to be like a strong screener, like his ability to roll to the rim and stuff like that off a CP or Booker P&R is going to be crazy. So on to 10, which is Tyler Hero. This is pretty... I can make the case pretty easily why Tyler Hero is 10 ahead of someone like DeAndre Ayton. He scored 37 points in a playoff game last year, and he's a rookie, and played a meaningful role on a team that made the NBA Finals. So he is I would say he has the pedigree of a guy, unlike, there's going to be a lot of guys that have made playoff runs on the list going forward. Spoiler alert, that's pretty obvious, but that was incredibly impressive. That alone probably deserves him a spot on the list, even if he had done nothing else. Now, being this high, the reason for me was I don't know what his long-term upside is yet. Nobody really does. But I can say confidently the level of confidence he plays with and his ability to be like a secondary playmaker and a three-point shooter, and because he plays in Miami and he's a teammate of guys like Jimmy Butler, his effort level is really strong. And so even though he's not by any means like a great defensive player right now, I don't doubt that he's going to develop into a really above average defensive player, because that's what Miami requires of their guys when they're down there. But Tyler Hero, I'm curious from you, what do you see, if you can even gauge it, what do you think his potential like upside is after 1 year in the league?
It's really hard to say because it's hard to imagine where he's going to be at physically in a few years, because that's the thing that was so miraculous about what he did in the playoffs was he did look very much like the 20-year-old that he was. He looked like a boy out there. And so trying to think of what his frame could look like at 25, 26, 27, no idea. No idea. But he's a guy that, you're right, is blessed with tremendous confidence, but he's also a very skilled offensive player, like a very, very skilled offensive player. The comparison that gets bandied about is Devin Booker. I don't know where that came. Actually, I do know where that came from. It came from a Zach Lowe story where someone in Miami was saying they thought he could be better than Book, and then it just kind of got taken off from there. What I think it would look like, well, if he does get a little bit bigger, but he carries that well, he could be your top engine offensively, a guy that does a million pick and rolls a game, but also a guy that comes off of pin downs, a guy that's running off of screens. He really potentially could do it all offensively from the guard position. And just being the type of guy that you could just get him in any type of scoring situation, and he could excel in that role.
Yeah, the two guys on the list, Tyler Hero, the guy we're covering, and the next guy on the list, they are a perfect pairing together at this spot because they're both, to me, exactly the same. Not as players, but it's like we've seen so little, but we believe that their upside is basically at this point. I couldn't tell you what the peak is. Like if you told me like one of these guys could develop into like a franchise player, I'd be like, yeah, I mean, I can't tell you that you're wrong from what we've seen so far.
Right, but it's also because of how little information we have and because of the natural bias you get when somebody wasn't a consensus thing that this happened, right? Both these guys were late lotto picks for different reasons, but you still have that bias where you're like, well, the peak could be this, because how could everyone have been wrong before? If the peak was going to be so much higher, why didn't we all know this before? So it's like you're always like have to fight against that bias where it's like, well, we were just wrong before, like
absolutely no. And you're right. If either of these guys was the second overall pick in the draft,
you'd be like, yeah, right on schedule.
Yeah, and you just talk about them in a definite way where you're like, yeah, multi-time all-star, potential superstar franchise guy. But you're right. Early in your career when you were, a mid-lotto pick, it's like, no, you're gonna have to prove it a lot more than guys that went at the top of the draft before people really give in. And that brings us to 9, which is Michael Porter Jr., basically just like a bigger version of Tyler Hero. Last year was his de facto rookie year, obviously, because he came in with injury issues, which are very, very real still. It's not as though he's got like cleared medicals.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Michael Porter Jr. at some point, and I hope it's not the case, could be derailed by injury more than anything else. The thing I love about him is I'm going to compare him to a guy, and not their game, just the way you and I watch basketball. You have always really liked Paul George, and the reason you've liked him is just because of how smooth he is on the court.
Yeah.
Michael Porter Jr. reminds me of that. He's so smooth with the ball in his hand at his size, and his shot looks so pretty.
I also think they also both know exactly what to say at exactly the right time also.
Yeah, one of his knocks is Michael Porter is a knucklehead.
Knucklehead. He's a knucklehead, dude.
He just is. But no, in the playoffs last year, he made rookie mistakes, and I mean they were glaring. There were a few times where he just made some really boneheaded mistakes on the court, and that's part of being a young player. He'll grow out of some of that, but this was a guy who, if like I looked at his per 36, because again he was playing a more limited role and he didn't play a lot of games, so I just wanted to see like how would that break out. So 51, 42, 80 splits, and 20,
ridiculous.
20, 10, 2, 1, and 1 would have been his per 36, which is just, again,
I mean, he on a per minute base is like Zion-esque or like Joel Embiid's rookie season-esque of just per minute production. Like, it can't scale, obviously, but like,
yes.
so productive when he's out there. I mean, his upside, dude. His upside is one of the best players in the league.
Correct. What he does is effortless. It is not difficult. It looks, and again, what I'm saying here are not player comps. I'm saying, like, when I watch games, this is how I feel when I'm watching him. Like, he gave me some Paul George vibes. He also gave me some, like, Kevin Durant vibes, where it's like, if he's going to release that, like, he would come off like a 2 dribble and just pull up and take a shot. It's like, if he's going to release that shot from there, I don't know who's going to be able to stop that shot if he has that. And
Kevin Durant is a good comparison because it's just a physical comparison. There's not other guys in the league that have that height. Like, Michael Porter is a legit 6'10", maybe 6'11" or more. It's like, he can shoot over the top of literally anybody.
Correct. And you're right. His potential, if he stays healthy, is like one of the best players in the league, which during draft night, we weren't recording at this point because we didn't have the podcast going yet. But I remember you and I were on the phone during the draft, and both of us were like, okay, when is this fall going to stop? Because, again, it made sense why you'd be hesitant to take him like in the top 5, because it's like, yeah, the injury concerns are really real.
It's such a stacked draft, too, that it was like...
Yes. There was a lot of guys. You could make
the case. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys. There's still a handful of guys on the list that we haven't gotten to yet. You know what I mean?
From that same draft, yeah.
But
then you got to like 7-8, and you're like, okay, this is probably the right spot. And then it just continued, and you're like, all right, man. Like, at what point?
Well, there were plenty of teams there where it was like and Denver obviously was the team that filled this spot where it was like, it just needs to be a team that doesn't need him to do anything this year. And that was surprising when the Clippers didn't take him because they had back-to-back selections.
Yeah.
And you would have thought that would have been the perfect cover to draft him, because it was like, okay, well, we had 2 picks in a row. So it's like we drafted SGA with one of them. He's the guy that we know is going to play. And then we threw a shot in the dark with the other one. They didn't obviously do that. I know... I've heard John Hollinger talk about this because obviously they had access to the medical records with the Memphis Grizzlies that year. Him saying that, like, it was very bad. And, like, it seemed like it was a likelihood, if not a strong likelihood, that he just was not going to be able to play at all. Yeah. And so, I mean, I get that.
I think he referred to it as the worst medicals he had ever seen.
Yeah, so it's like it had to be, so I get the fall. It's like it had to be a situation where the team was like, it was going to be found money. And boy, is it found money on a team that has 2 of the best young players in the league.
Yes, it absolutely is. Let's keep moving because we are at a snail's pace yet again, 2 weeks in a row now. 8 on the list is De'Aaron Fox. So I'm going to real quick, I want to kick it to you with a question. You and I both like this Sacramento team a lot. You have been you've been on the record as being one of the, you had them at 50.
Can't wait to watch them tonight.
Yeah, 50 plus wins last year is what you called for. So what I want to know from you, has anything happened that leads you to believe that De'Aaron Fox is not or cannot be the best player on a team that actually contends? Or do you still feel like he's got that in him?
Oh, no, I think for sure. I mean, he could be plateaued. I mean, like, and in which case he would be still quite good, but not quite an all-star level player. And I think that's a possibility for sure. I mean, I think what he needs to do to improve is he's still undersized, and maybe that just will never come, but like he still needs to become more physical. He needs to become more effective in the half court, which can come in a few different ways, but like he needs that. The biggest one would be like he needs to be able to take and make shots off the dribble, and he needs to make better decisions in the half court. And so, and a lot of that has to do with obviously guys he's playing with and the system that they're running. But I actually think they could be pretty good this year because they have the continuity that they didn't have last year. Getting Halliburton was a really inspired pick for them with their group. So I think, and he's going to have a lot of space to operate, and I know they're going to run this year, which they just puzzlingly were reluctant to run last season. It was bizarre. But I think there could be, he's the guy I look at here where I think there could be regret having him ahead of a guy like Michael Porter or some other guys on the list, where those are probably more difficult things for him to accomplish than some of the other things we've prescribed for earlier players, where it's like, well, they just need to do this, and if they do that, they're going to be this. Like, him becoming like an off the dribble bomber, that's a pretty big ask. You know what I mean? It's not like it's impossible. I would point to a guy like Kemba Walker. I think he wants to try to be on that Kemba trajectory where like Kemba made himself into that guy, where at the peak of Kemba's powers with Charlotte, before these injuries really started to catch up with him, he was like a poor man's version of Dame Lillard, where it's like they had him doing a lot of the same stuff offensively, and he was a complete non-entity as a shooter when he came into the league, and he built himself up that way. And so that's the type of guy that like he would need to become. And you know, that's a big ask. What's your do you actually, before I say that, like, do you see the same thing I do? And then if you do, what is your confidence level that he could actually get there?
I'll answer it a couple of ways here. I'm going to play both sides of the fence. So I like De'Aaron Fox as a player a lot. My biggest worry comes from you said you think Sacramento can be good this year. I agree with you, but it's the same thing that I believed last year, and there's a couple things that make me really nervous. Number one, Luke Walton as a coach. I don't love that, and I don't think that helps. I don't have the same faith in Sacramento going into the season that you do, because I think they could have similar issues to what they did last year, and you know, part of the way to correct that is you need to find a new coach. The other problem
Dan,
see is,
haven't you heard of how good Jabari Parker looks?
Trust me, it's very similar to last year. It's eerily similar to last year, how everything coming out of Sacramento made us really bullish on where they were going that season. But, you know, honestly, man, I like him as a player a lot, but I agree with you. This was the guy I had on my list where I go, there's a way, because of where he plays and how he's used, there's a path where he is just not as good as, you know, quite a number of the players that are behind him on this list.
And we kind of infamously had him, like 2 or 3 last year? Something like that?
Yeah, we had him way high. Yeah.
So I was drinking the Kool-Aid heavy off of Team USA, where it's like, God, dude, I wish he had just stuck with it and actually done it. Because in camp for Team USA, he was like, him and Mitchell, we came out of that being very high-end, Mitchell being like the alpha guys of this age group.
Yeah.
And they actually talked about this during the broadcast of the first preseason game for the Kings, that De'Aaron took a step back last year in terms of his vocal leadership. And so a lot of the reason why we had him that high was because we believed him to be one of the alpha leaders of this generation. And he just kind of mysteriously took a step back in that place. We probably never know why. I mean, it probably has something to do with stuff going on off the court, usually is how that goes. But if he needs to kind of regain that footing of being that elite leader, in addition to, because that honestly would smooth over some of the skill stuff. You know what I mean? Because it's like if he was like a low 20s scorer and was, you know, basically just at his level right now, but was the type of leader where guys want to play with him. Because it's like, I thought he was like kind of like a baby Dame in that regard, where it was like he's like, guys are just gravitating toward this guy, then he is worth everything, you know. And so that's probably as important as what he could do on the court, honestly, is getting that back.
Yeah, and as far as we know, there's still a stink that comes with playing in Sacramento, and it may just be one you can't wipe off.
Well, then he is, you know, it's going to be it'll be another 5 years until we see him in another situation.
And, you know, and I'm not saying that this is something he can't overcome or the team can't overcome. This is the guy on the list I had the most concern about. And it has less to do with him. It has a lot to do with the situation that he's in. And so I hope that Sacramento has a much more buttoned up season where they don't have such public, you know, discontent within the locker room and issues on the coaching staff. I mean, early last year with what Luke Walton was coming out and saying, it was just, there was so much shit going on. It's just I just
Hopefully
hope
they can
that
get their shit together with Buddy. Honestly, it's
agreed.
It's just they got this weird shit going on with Buddy, and it's like, again, you watch the games. I watched the game. We watched the preseason game, the other night, and if you watch a lot of the Kings, you're like, man, what? First of all, they're not a national team,
no,
obviously, and the stuff that comes out about Buddy is bad. And you're like, and he gets paid quite a bit of money. And so you're like thinking you're going to turn on the game and this guy's going to be a non-entity. And you're like, oh no, this guy is really good.
Yes.
Really, really good player. And they count on him a lot offensively. And it's like, can they get that situation smoothed out? And can Buddy try a little bit on defense? And could you theoretically play lineups with those two dudes and Halliburton? And if you and when then what does that start to become? Yeah, it's like they got some pieces, but it's just they are the more cautionary tale, honestly, of going into the tank, because it's almost better to like completely crash and burn when you do that, because then you're like, okay, well, we drafted Derek Williams, and so that guy's not going to be a max on our books. But it's like when you do what the Kings have done, where it's like, no, these guys have all justifiably gotten raises on their rookie deals.
Yeah.
To what end, though? You know what I mean? And you're like, are we going to need to bring someone in that's better than you guys over the top of you? Or what's going to happen here?
No, you put yourself in a terrible spot, because it's not the team's fault. Like, a guy plays well enough to earn the max, but it hasn't led to winning. So it's not like, it's kind of like the Don Mitchell situation. It's like, hey, we're in the playoffs every year. It's like, gladly I would pay you whatever it is that I need to pay you. I'll max you out happily. But with guys that their performance hasn't led to winning, and it's not their fault. Like, you're betting that when things and other circumstances around them change, like, they are going to be winning players.
Donovan Mitchell's the right example, because it's like, that's the question, and that we'll never have the answer to this, which is he gets a lot of the benefit of the doubt because he came into a ready-made system.
Yes.
And just became a cog in the machine. And albeit the most important cog, but still a cog in the machine that led to winning. We'll never know what it would have been like if SGA was in that spot, or Jamal Murray, or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like he just came into a situation where he was going to perform. And so any of the questions that rubes like us go like, well, is he good stats, bad team guy? Blah, blah, blah. It's like he's just never had to deal with that because his team was always going to be good.
Yep. No, it's... And let's move on to 7. But yeah, De'Aaron Fox was the guy. You and I both are, I think coming out of this, you and I are both still really high on him. He's just the most
100%.
concerning of the top 10.
It's there's always the dip like this before the big rise, or it's a plateau. And so it's like, it's one of those things, man.
Yeah, we'll know. I mean, we should know. If he stays healthy, we should know by the end of the year. Number 7 is Bam. Arguably, this guy could have been higher. I will defend as we go through the list why other guys were obviously ahead of him.
For sure.
I do think it's the right spot for him. Last year was his breakout year. He has one of the rarest archetypes in the league, and that makes him insanely valuable, which is why Miami got him paid, which is what it was the right thing to do. He is not a guy similar to like Draymond in Golden State in his prime, where it's hard to quantify statistically why this guy gets paid the money he does, but you just have to watch the games and you come away being like, oh, I totally get it. Like, he's arguably the most important player because he does all the shit that you need to do to win basketball games. So we were super high on Bam last year, and I'll give us a little bit of credit for last year's podcast where he was early on the list. He was between 20 and 25 somewhere, but both of us were like, this is our guy. Like, this, if we had to make a bet on a guy in this range, this would be the bet we would make. And he had his breakout year. He has ultimate positional, flexibility and versatility. He really had a more varied offensive game. It was weird to see, like, the defensive development. I wasn't surprised by the offensive development that remains. He still has work to do, but I mean, how quickly he turned his offensive game on.
Right.
Surprised me.
Into a weapon. Yeah.
Into a real weapon. Yeah. What were your thoughts on Bam on this list? And again, kind of just the generic question of, he's 7 on the list. Like, do you think that Miami has found like a foundational piece once, Jimmy Butler obviously
No, they
ages
definitely
out?
have. And the reason that these guys on the list are ahead of us is every single one of them plays basically the 1 or 2 positional archetypes that's more valuable than what he does. That's it. Let's say, here's the example, is Draymond on the Warriors when they had KD. Well, what's the only thing more valuable than Draymond on the Warriors? It's KD and Steph. So it's all the guys on our list that are above him are your KDs and Stephs, and I put that in heavy quotation marks, but as in guys that are go-to scorers at valuable positions.
Yep.
But he's about as valuable of a player as you could possibly be without being a give this guy the ball and let them cook player.
Yes. And I think the other thing to keep an eye on with Bam, too, is he's another one of those guys. And you and I mean, this list, it sounds redundant after a while, but it is true, which is why we keep bringing it up, where it's like these are young players, and any young player that every year they've been in the league, they've just made significant leaps and have continued to improve. It's like, well, then you just have to bet that that's the case, because making a bet otherwise would be foolish, because what are you using to defend
right, you're
that
like,
bet?
now they're done.
Yeah,
now
exactly. It's like he's reached some kind of peak. It's like, well, that seems really silly. Bam is one of those guys where because he made such a leap offensively so quickly and has so much more to unlock on that side of the court, it's going to be really fascinating with him and Hero on the same team, how those guys develop, because that right there, while you have Jimmy, they're obviously going to be playing a role alongside Jimmy. But once, Dragic and Jimmy age out and you have these two guys that you and I have in the top 10 of this, 25 list, it's like you pretty much are set up to compete in the near term with a mixture of vets and young players, allow them to develop, and then once that veteran group ages out, you're tailor-made and ready to go for the next, so I mean they're set
and
up.
then once they get Giannis, they're really going to take off.
Yeah, Giannis, Harden, maybe. They could do any number of things. But what's interesting is a lot of these teams have gotten into the mold of we want to compete on a 2 to 3 year window, and we are shoving all the fucking chips. Every chip we got goes in the middle for a 2 to 3 year run. Miami's one of those teams where it's like, if they decided not to liquidate,
funny though, but they don't have those chips are gone, but it's not because of that. They're gone from other things.
Correct. Well, the chips that they've got to put in is if they wanted to make a Harden trade.
No, they'd have to trade Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson. Obviously,
that's correct. Yeah. So, which is tough. So but if they don't end up executing on a plan like that, then they're basically set up to compete on a window that is much longer than most of the other teams that are contending right now today, which is very good, because although they've given up a lot of shit, like you said, they've given up a lot of their chips. It's not like a Clippers Lakers type situation where they've given up all of their future, and so there's going to be a period of a really rough patch coming after they compete for championships.
Right. All right, let's move on to number 6. It's Ja Morant, somebody that arguably could have been a lot higher because we argued about it and trying to figure out where he was going to be on the list. We both watched him play in a preseason game last night where he was the best player on the floor. He really dominated the game. Somebody that could... And the second year is always really tricky because for every guy that does the Luka and Trey thing, where they take a quantum leap from year 1 to 2, there's Jason Tatum, and where it's like, oh no, it's just they're just as good as they were last year, but now because it's not surprising, it's a disappointment, you know? And so Ja, it's going to be really interesting to see which one of those categories he falls in. And if he falls into the quantum leap category, does Memphis just have to be a playoff team? I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out.
I don't want to be hyperbolic on a 1-game sample in the preseason, but I'm betting
against the worst perimeter defense in the league.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they played Minnesota last night, but Ja Morant, I would bet a quantum leap. And last night he did a couple of things, and they were small things, but there was a couple of plays. He was bringing the ball up the court at the end of the first half, I believe, or the end of the first quarter, and absolutely torched Beasley off the dribble. And Malik Beasley got so turned around a couple of different times, he might have even fallen over by the end of it. And Morant just pulled up for a 3 and knocked it down. And then there was another where he actually had a step-back 3, where he just took a 1 dribble and stepped back and knocked it down. That's the big thing, is if he becomes a better 3-point shooter, And he was not shy about taking him last year. Like, it's not as though he was averse to the shot. Like, he would take him if they were there.
took him. He just wasn't good
Correct.
at it.
If he improves as a three-point shooter, this dude is going to be fucking lethal. And so last night, that was the thing. Like, before the season started, I kind of had in the back of my mind, I was like, if Morant becomes a three-point shooter, like, this dude is going to be impossible to stop. And if that's the case, then Memphis, I agree with you. Like, how are they not going to be a playoff team?
Well, so can I just say who 4 and 5 are? Because this is actually...
Yeah.
This is a group where this is a cop-out here, but it's a tier like how that group of 4 bigs was in last week's episode. And so we went back and forth on this. It's 6 was Morant, 5 was Donovan Mitchell, and 4 is Trae Young. And that's a group where it's like there's almost nothing distinguishing the group. And now that I'm looking at it, honestly, it's like I think I would probably have Mitchell 6th if I was to do it again.
I agree with you.
But
the only reason we put Don Mitchell ahead is out of respect for what he's done in his short career, because not only has he made the playoffs every year because he's on a better team, but he's also played really well in the playoffs.
Well, and that bubble was crazy. Well, the bubble was, the duel with Jamal Murray was something that really elevated his standing with us because he was finally put into the position that these other young guys are, whereas like his team, through a combination of injuries and honestly just some of their moves not panning out last year, he was in a situation where he had to kind of be a one-man show offensively, and that was something I was always greatly skeptical of. Was like in their ecosystem, he can be the guy that takes the most shots and is going to rack up between 20-25 a game, but can he be a guy that can score garbage buckets against a playoff style defense where there's nothing else going? And the answer was a resounding yes. And that was a huge, to me, I feel like that didn't get enough talk. That was a major moment, I think, in his career that answered a lot of questions about that.
Him and Jamal Murray. What happened in
Both
that
of them,
series?
for sure, yeah.
Yeah, it was, and
well,
honestly,
but the thing with Jamal Murray is people weren't even asking the question because he was so relatively bad during the regular season.
Well, yeah, and people had kind of relegated Jamal Murray to this, like, no, he's a fine player.
Bad contract. Ooh.
Yeah, and just like he's a fine player. Like, that's about the extent of it. And then when he did that with Don, it was like, no, he's like a guy, like a real guy now.
Right.
And I think with this list of 3 that you brought up, like we've kind of covered Ja. I think, he could be like a rocket ship type player where he makes another leap this year and maybe another one in year 3. And then we're like, oh my God, he's a franchise player. The reason that he's 6, and again, I understand what you mean. I'd probably have Don there. Don has done it again on playoff teams because he's been in the league longer than Ja and Trae. But Trae leads it. Trae leads this list.
Well, it's interesting because it's like these are the 17, 18, 19 guards. It's really fun. Really fun.
You and I have not wavered on Trae at all. There's been just a ton of talk about the fact that he averaged 30 points, but he was on a 20-win team.
Dude, I was just looking at this shit the other day, man. Bro, he took the same... That's narrative. It's not rooted in the statistics. I was looking at it last year. I was expecting to go back and look and be like, oh, yeah, Trae led the league in shots per game or shooting possessions. He didn't. Like, he took the amount of shots per game that he should have taken, clearly, because he scored on efficiency. He was a more efficient scorer last year than Luka Doncic. Now, he's clearly not the same level of offensive player that Luka is for a whole bevy of obvious reasons. But when it comes to just, we took the similar amount of shots per game, because they did, I made more of them. Like, Trae Young made more of shots, like he just did. And Trae, to me, I think we talked about this when we were putting the list together. He had to be higher than these guys to me because he is the only guy that has come into the league so far in this post-Steph Curry NBA that has that deep shooting, but also is a preternatural passer and elite playmaker. He's the only guy that has come in that has both in that time period. And we'll probably see more and more of these guys come into the NBA, but he's the first one to come in that has both. And I don't think that gets talked about enough. if he just had one of those two things, which people act like it's just the shooting, that would be something, and that would be a guy that was this high on our list. But he has like the LaMelo Ball passing plus the deep range shooting, and you're just like, if you were creating a point guard, a lead guard, and a lab, wouldn't those be the two attributes you would pick above any other attribute?
Without question. And I think the reason you and I haven't wavered, I want to say a couple of things, speaking to the criticism that Trae Young has gotten. The first is his defense. Number one, young players are rarely good at defense ever. Number two, he carried an absurd offensive load and playmaking load because he was on dog shit teams for 2 consecutive seasons. Number three, he is a small player who likely will never be above league average. But to say that that is impossible is so short-sighted given what he's been dealing with in Atlanta his first 2 years. The other thing,
he's a little guy, like he's a small guard. And also, let's just be honest about how much that could matter in the playoffs. And it's like, there's a reason also why those two skill sets we just said, the passing and the deep shooting, are the most important from a small guard, and why it's more important than what Fox can do and what Ja can do and what Donovan Mitchell can do, is because if we're talking about actually getting deep into the playoffs, there's a reason why there's almost never been teams that have been title teams that are on the backs of a physical guard that gets into the paint. It's because it's too physical, and that's why wing is the most important position, is because they do the guard stuff at the highest level because they can take the physicality of the playoffs. And so it's like, actually for me, the best thing that a guard could be, if you're talking about at the highest levels, is a finesse player like Trae, because a guy like Ja right now, even if he was on a team that was good enough to be going deep in the playoffs, he would get rocked in the conference finals and finals because he's just not big enough to do what he does well.
Yes.
He'd be relegated to non-shooter guard.
Yes, and he'd be inefficient. What I'll say about Trae is those are the guard qualities that can't get taken away in the playoffs. You can't take away somebody being able to pull up from 30 feet and somebody who can just create through his passing. There's not some kind of potion that you can take to eliminate somebody's ability to pass the rock. So I agree with you.
And then the flip side, to really hammer this point home, you can build a wall though to stop Fox and Ja Morant from getting into the paint. You can
100%, and it happens every year, and it's happened since we've started watching basketball. Since we were kids.
And it's like in a lot of these, both Ja and De'Aaron Fox, you'd be hitting the lotto if those guys could become Russell Westbrook.
Yes.
Like the absolute lotto. And we saw the ceiling of that. Now the ceiling might be different in this different NBA with more spacing, but we know that at the end of the day, when we're talking about deep into the playoffs, we're talking about taking really difficult, inefficient shots, because you cannot get shots at the rim. Period. That's not available to you.
Well, and I'll just finish up by saying the other thing I don't like criticized about Trae Young is he scored because he was on a terrible team. If you average 30 and 9, I just don't give a fuck.
Period.
You
but
don't,
especially on efficiency, though. We did it on efficiency.
100%. But and even if it wasn't efficient, man, there are guys who can get you 20. There are not many guys in this league, regardless of efficiency or volume, that are getting you 30. They just don't. It's really hard to score that many points a game. He obviously had the 9 assists, which was great. But no, he's a phenomenal player. I believe what Atlanta did this year, they improved so drastically. The only thing that could get in their way is obviously the lack of continuity, the lack of training camp, and then COVID issues. Like if COVID issues come up and you match that with, the continuity being an issue and not getting to practice enough, that could be a problem early. Hopefully it doesn't, kind of derail them. But building even an average team around Trae is not something we've seen. So they're going to be a significantly better team this year. Number 3. So top 3 here. These are and Trae Young's kind of fringe. The top 3 are superstars. The guys who can be absolute franchise superstars, multi-time All-Stars, potential MVPs. The third guy on the list is Zion. Played 24 minutes, he played 24 total games last year, 27 minutes a game in those 24 games. So he's played very little. I'll just say the one thing that watching Zion, I was surprised by in such a limited sample, him being a rookie, was there were a ton of times where they dumped the ball to him last year expecting a bucket. They needed him to score. And he was able to do it through sheer physicality without a polished skill set at all. And he just did it. But he did it. He just scored the ball. And he averaged 22 a game last year. And every time he got it, I'd be like, man, there's so much refining that needs to be done. And then the ball would go in. And I would just like, well, if this guy can score lacking any finesse, once he starts to like refine his game, this dude is going to be a fucking bear to deal with. That's why he is everything that they say he is, because the one thing that cannot be improved upon and you cannot buy is the anomalous physicality that he has. And that's the same thing for a lot of very unique superstars in the league. And it's the reason why when Shaq was at the height of his powers, he was better than Tim Duncan and Kevin Garnett, and he was the best center. Like, Shaq's peak is the best center to ever play. He didn't have the best career, you know what I mean? Like, that would be Kareem, obviously, and Bill Russell. But, like, the peak is that because he's anomalous physically. And LeBron is anomalous physically, and that's what makes him a step above Kevin Durant. You know what I mean? And so that what he has, you can't buy. And the question is going to be, can you match that with some semblance of skill level? Can you stay healthy enough to improve? You know what I mean? Because it's like, yeah, we know right now he can just step on a court and score the ball, period. Like, that's a fact. But can he stay healthy enough to actually improve his skill level where that the whole package comes together? That's an open question. And if he does, you know, he's going to be one of the best players in the league. Yes. Health is the only thing. Because again, I'll say it one more time. The reason it was impressive is he averaged 22 points a game. And if you watched him, you're like, no, he's physically a dominating force. But I've never seen somebody score 22 points a game that looked like that. It was bizarre. It was like he would bowl into guys.
Joel Embiid, when he first came into the league, I would say.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Less so because it's a different physical thing. I mean, Zion is just his own type physically. But I think they had a very similar beginning of their careers. Obviously, with Joel missed the 2 seasons. But I just mean, like, when they got on the court, it was like this very precarious thing where it's like, how many minutes are they going to play? Like, that was the whole story around both of them. It's like, how many minutes are they allowed to play? Do they play back-to-backs? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, here's what we know is when they're on the court, they're so unrefined and unpolished, but they're the best player on the court.
That is correct. And that's why he's 3 on this list. The 2 guys ahead of him, the health is the separator, because it's yet to be seen if Zion can stay healthy. Right. Number 2 is Jason Tatum. So another superstar potential player. He took a leap last year, and he plays the most important position. He's a wing. And
he's like the opposite of Zion, where it's like he's fairly ordinary physically, but he's got the best skill package of any wing in the league that's young.
Yes.
You know, like...
And we've talked about Tatum before. The one thing that I'll say about Jason Tatum is like 50, 40, 90. Those splits are well within range for him. And his handle improved so much last year that it made him impossible to stop. When he was really hot in games, it was one of those like devastating individual player performances that you saw like in Steph's prime or KD's prime, where it's like, if this guy starts cooking, it is impossible to stop. And it makes him, to be honest with you, like he also increased and started shooting volume threes and was fucking good.
That's what I was gonna say is they got to take the training wheels off on this guy and let him shoot volume.
Yep.
And encourage him to shoot volume, because it's like even with an efficiency dip, you need that volume from him. It's like the question remains for me is like, can he build on his frame enough to become physically imposing with that skill set? And if so, or if not, like, what's his ability to finish through contact going to be going forward? Because that's like the only thing missing for me.
Yeah.
Period.
No.
Like I other than that, he's just a absolutely complete offensive player and is a joy to watch play.
The finishing through contact thing, it comes at his own detriment because he's so smooth that it's like he doesn't need to do it, and that's why he doesn't do it. And it's like,
Right.
Actually, man, you kind of need to like force
No,
yourself.
he does need to do it though to get to the highest levels. He needs
That
to
is
do
correct. That is correct. So like, it's one of those things where I don't believe he avoids it. I think he believes he can get away without it. The reality is you can't.
He can't.
Need it.
No, he can't. Not if he's going to get to the final boss. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like he's gotten to the final boss in the game. He just needs but I think he will, clearly, because it's like he's checked every other box and then some. And is clearly such a motivated young man, and it's just like an incredible guy. And so I think, I would like to see Boston go for it more. This has been my biggest criticism of their franchise in the last handful of years. Like, especially they lost Hayward. Tatum's paid now. Everyone's paid. Like, and they're kind of, it's not that they're out of assets, but like that period of time where they were the asset-rich darlings of smart NBA analysis, those shots have been fired. You know what I mean? Like they're out of rounds there, and it's time to see what that all came to be. And I'd like to see them be a lot less conservative with Tatum.
Yes.
And just let him be a little more wild.
And to be honest with you, I think year 4 is a big leap year for a lot of guys, and I think it will be for Tatum too. The team needs to unlock him and allow him to do things that he hasn't done yet. And I think you and I, we were dubious at the time. We didn't come out openly and oppose it, but we were skeptical of the Kemba Walker signing in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, especially with the way Tatum has developed, that's the spot where it's like, if you did not have that money tied up in Kemba Walker, and you could make some different maneuvers given what you found in Jalen and Tatum, I think they'd be much better off. But they're just, like you said, everybody's paid.
It's almost like they haven't like fully given these guys the trust that almost any other franchise wouldn't. Like, it's a great opportunity, obviously, to be able to have guys on rookie deals that are greatly exceeding that, and then we can spend that money on older players. Like, obviously, it's the dream. That's the dream when you have young guys. But, now that they are paid, you're right. Like, it would be nice to see them get that trust, those two guys, because it's like, what a better foundation to have than two all-star wings like that. You know what I mean? Like, I was going to say this about OG when we were talking about him. It's a very similar thing, and with Boston, they have a higher upside because Tatum's the best of the whole group of them. But like, having two wings like that is such a luxury, and there's a floor to how bad you could be if they stay healthy, because like, if you get that two-way play out of those positions, it's basically impossible to be bad.
Well, and hypothetically, the reason I say what I said about the Kemba signing was, it's like, think of if they would have been like in a position to do a real like Drew Holiday type trade.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And they were calling about it and had Kemba very much involved in those talks, as they did Hayward. But I just think they've done a weird thing where it's like, I would never be critical of a team trying to maximize their window and trying to win right away. But like, between, Horford and Kyrie and Hayward and Kemba, like, they've made some huge splashy signings. And the reality is, you come out of all of that being like, Tatum. And,
it's still all about Tatum and Brown.
Yeah, it's still about Tatum and Brown. Like, we still are at that point. So, let's just get to number one. So Jason Tatum 2, number 1 is so obvious. He will be number 1 on this list for as long as he qualifies.
Next year is the last year for him, and he'll be number 1. It's like he could tear his Achilles right now
and still be
number 1 on the list. I mean, he's the best player to enter the league since LeBron, and that's not particularly close. The only guys that are in competition with him are KD and AD, honestly, as far as just guys that have come into the league and immediately had that level of impact. But he's the best young player in the history of the NBA, and I'm confident saying that. I mean, we don't know if he's going to end up having, we don't know what that means for the rest of his career, but we do know that, like, what he just did in his second year in the league was better than what anyone's ever done.
Luka averaged 29, 9, and 9 last year. And his shooting splits were 46, 32, 76, meaning he averaged 29, 9, and 9 with like incredibly obvious and relatively easy improvements that he can make to his game like right now, which I expect is what's going to happen. His 3-point shot is going to improve 100%.
Well, and he's going to be the type of guy too, where it's like his 3-point percentage is never going to be as great as he is as a shooter, because he's going to take a lot of difficult shots, and that's what makes him so good.
Correct. But yeah, I mean, he'll turn that 32 into like a career 36, 37 likely. Like you said, he's not going to be like a 41, 42 because of what he's going to take. But the reality is, like, this is the guy who is going to, at some point, maybe even as soon as this upcoming season, he's going to win an MVP, likely more than one. He is the best player since LeBron, in my opinion, to come into the league. And he's the only guy, from an eye test perspective, that has ever done this one thing, which you and I have talked about forever with LeBron. The only guy in the league where when he's on the court, he single-handedly controls pace on both sides of the floor. When LeBron is in a game, that game is being played at whatever pace LeBron chooses that game to be played at. It just is what it is. He single-handedly, especially in his prime, could do that. And Luka was doing it last year in the fucking playoffs against a Clippers team that had Kawhi and Paul George. He was doing the same shit.
By far the best player on the floor.
Yes, by far the best player on the floor. And he did that without Porzingis because of injury. And this was his second year.
And I mean, both those two guys unlock so much for him. It's like we were talking about Ayton playing with the guards in Phoenix. It's like Dallas, to their credit too, has done a great job of like putting the right type of pieces around him, because it's so simple when you have a guy that good. It's just like LeBron, where literally all you need to do is give them the ball, have them dribble the ball across the line, and have got shooters and dudes that can finish lobs as the only two types of players on the court with them.
Yep.
And you are guaranteed to be great. He was basically running that basic ass offense last year. It's like running the triple option. It's like how did, X team from the 90s, how did they have such a great offense? They ran the same play every time in football. You know what I mean? Like with Luka, they ran this basic ass offense, and they had the most efficient offense in the history of the NBA last season. And his second best player was Porzingis, and the third best player was THJ,
depending on the game.
Dwight Powell before he got hurt.
Yeah.
And it's like, Jesus Christ, man.
Well,
this guy's unbelievable.
In my notes, what I said is, like, you and I are lucky enough that we've been around for obviously the entirety of LeBron's career, and old enough that we can remember every step. And the one mistake I won't make with Luka is, like, I think back at just times where, LeBron's playing in 07, he's playing in 09.
Yeah, those are the years I regret.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not so much taking for granted, it's just there would be games where it's like, why didn't I spend more time watching LeBron play during that point in his career? Because it is truly that special.
And enjoying watching them figure it out, because it's like a lot of people, younger listeners and younger NBA viewers, like, won't remember that, because LeBron right now is probably the surest thing in a big game. He's definitely the surest thing in a big game since Michael.
Yes.
And he's in the top handful of guys where it's like, if it's a big game, and what he was doing with Cleveland in those last few runs when they were undermanned, it was like, he is such a sure bet. But to take it back to what you just said, 07, 08, 09, basically until he won the chip in 12, like, that was not it. And you had to watch him try to figure it out. And you're right, like, we can't make that mistake with Luka. Because it's going to be, he will inevitably, and this happened with Davis too, man, where it's like, they start off so hot, but there's inevitably going to be this period in the middle where, and Giannis is in it right now. And Davis was in it until he went to the Lakers, where it's like, that hasn't yet equated to the highest level of success because they haven't figured out these last couple of pieces to the puzzle. And then when they do, they're going to have this sustained run of greatness, and you're going to forget that was ever a problem.
Yes, and part of the story of truly great players that come into the league is what you're talking about right now. It's less about development because their game is naturally going to develop, but they're elite from the very beginning in terms of their skills. It doesn't even matter.
They're so good already.
Yes, but what it is okay, so how do I turn what I can do into winning at the highest level? Meaning, how do I improve the players around me? What types of players do I need around me? What does the team require of me? What things do I need to develop? Because those are the things this particular group needs from me because I can do everything. Those are the years where it's really fascinating to go back and watch, like during quarantine, because we had no sports for like the first 3 months of it. You and I were going back and watching old games, and I watched some 07 Cavs, and it's like LeBron is a force, but this is before LeBron figured out, like, okay, if I'm working with just a real rough shot group of guys, like, how am I going to maximize each of them? He was in the phase where it's like, no, I guess if they're not that great, my job is actually to be like greater than great. Like great got us into the playoffs. Greater than great might win us a championship. And it didn't pan out because actually, no, you have to unlock the other guys regardless of who they are and what they do. So you're right. Luka is that guy. And I mean, after, during last year, we talked about it a lot. Obviously, after the game that he played against the Clippers, basically single-handedly winning a playoff game against the Clippers, it just became obvious that it's like, no, this is the guy. There's a ton of guys on this list that we like that could be really, really good, even potential MVPs. But Luka's the only guy where it's like, no, this will probably be this generation's player. This will be that guy. LeBron came into the league and has been the guy for the league his entire career, and that's likely what Luka's going to be, which is super, super exciting because you never know when these guys are going to come around again.
It's very, very, very infrequent.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
So to wrap this up, Dan, now that we've talked through the list again and we've had a couple weeks to sit on it, do you have any regrets about how we had it ranked? I know we talked a little bit while we were doing it. It's like, this guy should have been higher. This guy should have been lower. Who on the list or which guys on the list would you want to get a mulligan on here to change their position?
To me, I like every guy that made the list. I still would say we had the right group of guys on the list. As far as position, I got to be honest, man. I think I'm going to regret having John Collins that low, specifically with guys on there like R.J. Barrett and Colin Sexton.
Like sore thumb.
Yeah, R.J. sticks out a lot, but even like Colin Sexton and guys like that, it's like, I don't know. I just got done watching an Atlanta game not too long ago, and John Collins was like a fucking freak in that game. So it could just be, recency bias in watching him. But I mean, that would be one because I also watched RJ play the other night, and he was really bad in a game where Obi Toppin was great. RJ Barrett was really bad. What about you? Any mulligans this early that you'd want to take?
Maybe would want to come out stronger for OG. Like we talked about at the top of the pod. Possibly having him, definitely leapfrogging him over SGA, but possibly getting him to 10 behind MPJ.
Okay. Yeah, and you're not going to get a big complaint from me on that. I love OG. So this week, this finishes out the Tough Watch 25 for this year. And next week we are doing, if I'm not mistaken, is next week over-unders? Is that our last preseason pod?
Win totals. Yeah,
yep.
It's we're going to tie that into being basically our season preview pod.
Yep. So it'll be over/under season win totals next week. That one will probably run long because we're gonna jam that into one pod because we have to. Because the following week we're gonna have a game to cover.
Might have to do some kind of gimmick where we set a timer.
Yeah,
probably.
I agree with that. So this was fun. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Are you watching hoops tonight? Are you gonna have a chance?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yep, me too. I'm locking in starting probably here at 4:00. I think the Atlanta game starts at 4, so I think I'm gonna lock into that.
That is correct.
So all right, this was fun. Good 25 list again this year. I feel good. I feel better about this one than last year, to be honest.
For sure.
Yeah. So, all right. Enjoy the rest of the day, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. See ya.